The morning of my graduation dawned with a heavy rain pattering against my window. Typical British weather for such an important day, I thought, as I straightened my tie for the fifth time. Oxford had been my home for 3 years, but today marked the end of that chapter. I glanced at my mobile. No messages from Dad. I wasn't surprised, really. He'd confirmed he was coming, but his words had carried that familiar reluctance I'd grown accustomed to over the years. My relationship with my father had always been complicated. After Mum died when I was 12, he'd retreated into himself, burying his grief in work and distance. I'd spent my teenage years trying to make him proud, achieving top marks, winning academic competitions, securing a place at Oxford, all in the hope of bridging that ever-widening gap between us. I hadn't even been certain he'd come today. His RSVP had been characteristically brief. "I'll be there." No congratulations, no expression of pride, just 4 words that left me both relieved and anxious. It had been nearly 6 months since I'd last seen him, at Christmas, when we'd exchanged pleasantries over a tense dinner before he retreated to his study with whiskey and work documents. As I pinned my graduation gown, my flatmate James knocked on my door. "Your dad just texted me. He's waiting downstairs." I felt my heart leap. He'd come early. Perhaps today would be different. I descended the stairs of our student accommodation to find him standing awkwardly in the foyer, looking out of place in his crisp navy suit, among the casual parents in more colorful attire. His hair had more gray than I remembered, and new lines creased his face, but his posture remained ramrod straight, the military bearing never quite leaving him despite 15 years in civilian life. "Dad," I said, approaching him with an uncertain smile. He turned, his expression inscrutable. "William, you look well." He extended his hand for a formal handshake, not the hug I'd secretly hoped for. "Thanks for coming," I said, shaking his hand firmly as he'd taught me. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. He checked his watch, a nervous habit I'd observed throughout my childhood. "Shall we proceed? I've got the car waiting." The drive to the Sheldonian Theatre was quiet, punctuated only by my attempts at small talk about the weather, the traffic, the ceremony schedule. Dad responded with monosyllables, his attention seemingly elsewhere. "I've accepted a position with a research firm in Cambridge," I ventured, hoping this news might spark his interest. "Starting next month." His eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "Good salary?" "Decent, but the opportunity is excellent. They're doing groundbreaking work on sustainable energy solutions." A nod. Nothing more. I fell silent, watching raindrops race across my window, feeling like I was 12 again, desperately seeking approval from a man who had forgotten how to give it. We arrived at the Sheldonian, joining the throng of black-robed graduates and their beaming families. I couldn't help but notice how other fathers had their arms around their children's shoulders, how they took photos with genuine smiles, how they looked at their offspring with unmistakable pride. "The ceremony starts in 45 minutes, I told Dad. "There's a reception for families in the hall if you'd like some coffee." He glanced at his watch again. "I'll just find my seat. Better to get settled early." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. "Right. I need to join the other graduates now anyway. I'll see you after the ceremony then?" "Of course," he said, his eyes already scanning the crowd, looking everywhere but at me. I turned away, joining my classmates who were buzzing with excitement, introducing parents to friends, taking selfies, celebrating. I pasted on a smile, played my part, but inside I felt hollow. What was I still trying to prove? That I was worthy of his attention? His love? After all these years, why did it still matter so much? The ceremony was grand, as Oxford traditions tend to be. Latin declarations, academic processions, centuries of ritual unfolding in the magnificent Sheldonian Theatre. From my position with the other graduates, I scanned the audience repeatedly, eventually spotting my father in the seating area, stiff and unsmiling. At least he was there. Names began to be called. Being a Turner, I knew I'd be toward the end. As the ceremony progressed, I noticed my father checking his watch with increasing frequency. Then, after about an hour, during a musical interlude, I saw him stand up and begin to edge toward the aisle. My heart sank. He was leaving. Before they'd even called my name, he was leaving. Without thinking, I stood up from my seat, ignoring the whispered protests of those around me. Protocol be damned. I couldn't let him walk out, not without understanding why. Not without finally confronting the distance that had defined our relationship for over a decade. I slipped out of the row of graduates and hurried toward the exit I'd seen him approaching. Outside in the corridor, I caught sight of his retreating figure. "Dad!" I called, my voice echoing against the historic walls. He turned, surprise registering on his face before it settled back into its usual mask. "William, what are you doing out here? You should be inside." "So should you," I said, approaching him. "They haven't called my name yet." He shifted uncomfortably. "I was just stepping out for a moment. I'll be back." The lie hung between us, obvious and painful. "No, you won't," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "You were leaving." His jaw tightened. "I have an important meeting in London this evening. I thought I could make both, but the ceremony is running longer than expected." "A meeting?" I repeated. "More important than seeing your son graduate." "It's not that simple, William." "It seems pretty simple to me," I said, feeling years of hurt bubbling to the surface. "It's always been simple. Work first. Always." He sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "You don't understand the pressures." "Don't I?" I interrupted. "Don't talk to me about pressure. I've spent my entire life trying to make you proud, trying to be perfect enough to deserve your attention. Do you know why I chose Oxford? Why I pushed myself to get top marks? Why I'm taking this job in Cambridge? It was all for you, all to make you see me." He looked taken aback by my outburst. "I do see you, William." "No, you don't," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "You haven't seen me since Mum died. It's like you buried part of yourself with her, including the part that knew how to be a father." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than I'd intended, but truthful nonetheless. For a moment, he seemed unable to respond, his usual composure fractured. From inside the theater, I could hear the ceremony continuing. Soon they would be reaching the tees. I should go back, take my seat, maintain the facade of normalcy that had characterized our relationship for so long. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Something had broken open between us, and I couldn't pretend to tape it back together. "You should go back inside," my father said finally, his voice strangely hollow. "Why? So you can slip away while I'm not looking?" I asked. "What are you running from, Dad? Is it me? Or is it yourself?" His face hardened. "You're being dramatic, William. This isn't the place for this conversation." "Then when is? When has there ever been a place or time for real conversation between us?" I challenged. "You've spent a decade keeping me at arm's length. I want to know why." A group of latecomers hurried past us, throwing curious glances our way. My father waited until they'd gone before speaking, his voice lowered. "You look so much like her," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him greatly. "Every year, you look more like your mother. Sometimes it's difficult to look at you and not see her." The admission struck me like a physical blow. "So, you punish me for resembling her? For reminding you of what you lost?" "It's not punishment," he said, shaking his head. "It's self-preservation." I laughed bitterly. "Self-preservation? What about me, Dad? What about what I needed?" A child who'd just lost his mother needed his father, not a ghost who happened to live in the same house. Inside the theater, I could hear them approaching the end of the R's. Soon, very soon, they would call William Turner. My father's face had gone pale. "I did my best," he said. But the words sounded hollow even to him, I could tell. "I made sure you had everything you needed." "Everything except you," I replied. "Everything except a father who could look me in the eye and tell me he was proud of me." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Of course I'm proud of you." "Are you? Then why were you leaving? Why couldn't you bear to stay and watch me accept my degree? To shake my hand and take a photo like every other parent here today?" He had no answer for that, his gaze dropping to the floor. From inside I heard James Taylor being called. I was next. This moment that I'd worked toward for years was about to pass. and I was standing in a corridor having the conversation I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times, but never had the courage to initiate. "I need to go," I said, turning toward the door. "William," my father called, his voice uncharacteristically urgent. "I am proud of you, more than you know." I paused, not looking back. Then, "Prove it. Stay." Without waiting for his response, I slipped back into the theater, rejoining the line of graduates just as William Turner was called. I walked across the stage, shook the chancellor's hand, accepted my degree, and despite myself, despite everything, my eyes searched the audience for my father. He wasn't in his seat. My heart sank as I moved through the rest of the ceremony mechanically, the parchment in my hand feeling suddenly meaningless. He'd left, after all. Nothing had changed. As the ceremony concluded and we filed out into the courtyard, the rain had stopped, leaving behind that peculiar, fresh scent that follows a summer shower. Graduates and families mingled, taking photos, exchanging congratulations. I stood alone, uncertain what to do next. My plan had been to have lunch with Dad before he returned to London, but that clearly wasn't happening now. "William?" I turned to find my father standing there, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. He'd stayed. "I thought you'd left," I said, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. He extended one of the glasses to me. I went to find better seats. After our conversation, I realized I couldn't see the stage properly from where I was sitting. He paused. "I didn't want to miss seeing you accept your degree." I took the champagne, studying his face for signs of insincerity, but finding none. "Thank you for staying." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Would you mind if we took a photograph together? To mark the occasion." The request was so unexpected, so uncharacteristic of him, that for a moment I didn't know how to respond. In all the years since Mum died, we'd taken precisely 3 photos together, all at formal events where it would have seemed odd not to. "I'd like that," I said finally. He asked a passing parent to take the photo. As we stood side by side, I felt his arm tentatively come around my shoulders, another gesture so unfamiliar it almost made me flinch. "I am proud of you, William," he said quietly, as the camera captured the moment. "I'm sorry I haven't been better at showing it." The admission, simple as it was, loosened something that had been tightly wound inside me for years. "I've missed you, Dad," I said, the words barely audible. His arm tightened around my shoulders. "I've missed you too, son." After the photo, we stood awkwardly, neither quite knowing how to proceed after such an uncharacteristic moment of honesty. "You mentioned lunch earlier," my father said finally. "Is that offer still open?" I nodded. "There's a good place just down High Street." As we walked together through the historic streets of Oxford, the conversation didn't flow easily. Years of distance couldn't be bridged in a single afternoon, but there was a new willingness to try, on both our parts. At lunch, after ordering, my father cleared his throat. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his expression serious. "The real reason I nearly left early today." I tensed, preparing myself for some excuse about work or responsibilities. "I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease," he said quietly. "Early stages, but progressing." The meeting in London was actually a medical consultation with a specialist. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "How long have you known?" "The initial diagnosis came 6 months ago. I've been getting additional opinions, trying different medications." He looked down at his hands, which I now noticed had a slight tremor. "I didn't want you to see me like this. Not on your graduation day. I wanted you to remember me strong." The pieces suddenly fell into place. His reluctance to come, his discomfort in public, his desire to leave early. It wasn't disinterest. It was fear. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I didn't want to burden you during your final exams," he said. "And I suppose I've never been good at admitting weakness. Your mother was always the strong one, despite appearances to the contrary." "Dad, you should have told me," I said, reaching across the table to place my hand over his trembling one. "You don't have to face this alone." He looked at our hands, then up at me, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I've been alone for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to be otherwise. Then let me remind you, I said firmly. Starting now. Over lunch, he shared the prognosis, cautiously optimistic with the right treatment. His fears, loss of independence, and his regrets, chief among them, the distance between us. I listened, asked questions, offered reassurances where I could. As we finished our meal, I told him about my new job in Cambridge, which now took on new significance. It's only an hour from London by train, I pointed out. I could come down on weekends, or you could visit me. He nodded, considering this. I'd like that. We walked back to his car in a different kind of silence than before, not strained, but thoughtful. As he prepared to drive back to London, he hesitated before getting in. William, he said, would you consider, that is, if it wouldn't disrupt your plans too much, coming to stay with me for a few weeks before you start your new position? The house is certainly big enough, and it might be nice to have some time together. The invitation, so unexpected and yet so desperately wanted, left me momentarily speechless. I'd like that very much, I managed finally. He nodded, seeming relieved. Good, that's good. We said goodbye, with an awkward embrace that nonetheless felt like the beginning of something rather than an ending. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I felt a curious mixture of emotions, sadness for his diagnosis, anxiety about the future, but also a cautious hope. The day hadn't gone as planned. In some ways, it had been harder, more painful than I'd anticipated. But in others, it had given me something I'd stopped believing was possible, a chance to know my father again, and perhaps, more importantly, a chance for him to know me. As I walked back to my accommodation to change for the evening's celebrations with my classmates, I realized that today I'd received something far more valuable than a degree. I'd been given a second chance at having a father. The weeks that followed my graduation marked a strange new chapter in my relationship with my father. I moved back into my childhood home in London, into my old bedroom that remained largely unchanged since I'd left for university. The first few days were awkward, both of us tiptoeing around each other, unsure of the new boundaries of our relationship. Dad maintained his routine. Up at 6, breakfast by 6:30, the morning paper meticulously folded beside his plate. But now I was part of that routine, sitting across from him at the breakfast table, the silence between us gradually becoming more comfortable. On my third day there, I noticed his hands shaking as he tried to butter his toast. Without comment, I reached across and gently took the knife from him, completing the task before sliding the plate back. He looked up at me, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face: embarrassment, gratitude, and something like respect. Thank you, he said simply. It's nothing, I replied, returning to my own breakfast. But it wasn't nothing. It was the beginning of a new dynamic between us, one where he allowed himself to be vulnerable, and I allowed myself to be needed. I accompanied him to his next doctor's appointment, taking notes while he listened stoically to the neurologist's explanation of disease progression and treatment options. In the car afterward, he stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It's not a death sentence, Dad, I said gently. Many people live full, active lives with Parkinson's for decades. It's not death I'm afraid of, he replied, his voice tight. It's dependence. I understood then what this proud, self-sufficient man feared most. Not the disease itself, but the loss of autonomy, the necessity of relying on others. On me. We'll figure it out, I promised. One day at a time. Gradually, we established a rhythm to our days. Mornings were for medical appointments or household tasks. Afternoons, when his energy was better, we sometimes ventured out, to museums he'd never had time to visit during his working years, to parks where we walked slowly but steadily, building his strength. In the evenings, we often found ourselves in his study, a room that had once been off-limits to me as a child. He would sit in his leather armchair, I on the small sofa, and we would talk. Really talk, perhaps for the first time in our lives. One evening, about 2 weeks into my stay, he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a photo album I'd never seen before. Your mother put this together, he said, placing it on the coffee table between us. I haven't looked at it in years. Together, we turned the pages, my father's trembling finger pointing out moments I barely remembered. My mother and me building a sandcastle on a beach in Cornwall. The three of us at Christmas, with me sitting on her lap, her smile radiant, despite the illness that was already beginning to claim her. She loved you so much, my father said softly. When she was diagnosed, her first concern was you, not herself, not even me. Just how you would cope, how you would remember her. I swallowed hard. I wish I had more memories of her. She knew that would happen, he said. You were so young. That's why she made this album. She said, make sure he knows how happy we were, James. Make sure he knows how much he was loved. His voice broke on the last word, and to my shock, I saw tears in his eyes, the first I could ever remember seeing. I failed her in that, he continued after a moment. After she died, I couldn't bear to look at these photos, to talk about her. It hurt too much. So I locked everything away. The photos, the memories, my grief, and in doing so, I locked you out too. I didn't know what to say. My own eyes were wet now. I thought I was protecting myself, he said, but all I did was rob us both of the comfort we might have found in each other. I reached across and placed my hand over his. We can't change the past, Dad, but we're here now. He nodded, covering my hand with his other one. Yes, we are. As the weeks passed, we continued to explore the past together, not just through photos, but through stories. I learned about how my parents met, at a university debate where they argued opposite sides and both lost, about their early years together, lean but happy, about the day I was born. My father had fainted, a detail he shared with reluctant humor. But we also began to build something new. I helped him research the latest Parkinson's treatments and connected him with support groups. He took a genuine interest in my upcoming job, asking thoughtful questions about the research I'd be doing. We even began planning modifications to the house that would make it more navigable as his symptoms progressed. One evening, about a week before I was due to start my new position in Cambridge, my father asked me to sit down in the living room. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his reading glasses. I've been thinking, he began, about the future. My future, specifically. I tensed, prepared for some bad news about his condition. The house is too big for me now, he continued. Too many stairs, too much maintenance. The logical thing would be to sell it, move into something more manageable. I nodded cautiously. That makes sense. Have you been looking at flats? Not exactly, he said. I've been looking at Cambridge. I stared at him, not comprehending at first. There's a nice development there. Retirement apartments. Fully accessible, good security, close to the train station. He paused. And about 15 minutes from where you'll be working. The implication of what he was suggesting slowly dawned on me. You want to move to Cambridge? To be near me? He looked uncomfortable, as if expecting rejection. Only, if you wouldn't mind. I wouldn't interfere with your life, of course. You're a young man starting your career. The last thing you need is your old father hanging about. But the medical facilities in Cambridge are excellent, and it would be convenient for you not having to travel to London if I need assistance. I was momentarily speechless. This proud man who had kept me at arm's length for so long was now proposing to move cities to be near me. I think it's a brilliant idea, I said finally, smiling, but only on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. Which is that you promise to hang about as much as possible, maybe even have dinner with me once a week. The relief on his face was palpable. I believe I could manage that. The day I left for Cambridge, my father drove me to the station. We'd spent the previous day packing up his house, preparing it for sale. Estate agents would be coming the following week, and he had already put a deposit on an apartment in Cambridge, scheduled to move in a month after I started my job. As we stood on the platform waiting for my train, an odd role reversal occurred to me. He was seeing me off, but soon I would be welcoming him to my new city, helping him settle in, being the stable one as he faced a major life transition. Will you be all right until the move? I asked, concerned about him rattling around the big house alone while dealing with estate agents and packing. I managed for 15 years before you came home, he reminded me with a small smile. I think I can handle a few more weeks. The train pulled in, and I picked up my bags. I'll come down on the weekend to help with the packing, I promised. He nodded. I'd appreciate that. There was a moment of awkwardness as we faced each other, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye. Then, with a decisiveness that surprised me, my father stepped forward and embraced me properly. I'm proud of you, William, he said, his voice rough with emotion, not just for your achievements, but for who you are, for the man you've become, despite my failures. I hugged him back, feeling the slight tremor in his frame, aware of how much this physical demonstration of affection cost him. You didn't fail, Dad, I said. We just took a detour, but we're finding our way now. As I settled into my seat on the train, watching my father's figure recede on the platform, I reflected on how differently things had turned out than I'd expected. On my graduation day, I'd confronted him out of anger and hurt, expecting either a further hardening of the walls between us or, at best, a grudging acknowledgement of my feelings. Instead, his revelation had opened a door that I'd thought permanently closed. His illness, terrible as it was, had provided the catalyst for honesty between us. In facing his own mortality and vulnerability, he'd found the courage to let me in at last. The train pulled away from the station, carrying me toward my new life in Cambridge. But unlike when I'd left for Oxford 3 years earlier, I wasn't leaving my father behind. This time, we were both moving forward, together. In the window reflection, I could see myself smiling. I realized that sometimes, what seems like an ending, a father walking away before hearing his son's name called, can actually be the beginning of something unexpected and precious. A second chance, a new chapter, a way home.